Now, this is usually where people go, whoa, wait a minute, isn't corporate protection supposed to insulate me from liability? Well, hi, this is Jeff Marsocci, the Plain English Attorney, and today I'm going to talk about family limited partnerships. Now, I'm coming at this a lot more from the estate planning end of things as opposed to the corporate end of things. There are other resources out there for that, and I might even do some of those in the future. But for now, we're really just talking about how family limited partnerships can benefit a family that has various business interests, how someone can put them under this umbrella, get a little bit of extra information, a little bit of extra protection, and still be able to manage things without giving up too much. Okay, so I'm calling this protective family business generational planning. That's a mouthful, but really it's how do you use family limited partnerships in estate planning. Now, in that context, my goal is to provide a plain English explanation of family limited partnerships while focusing on three things: sheltering family businesses from lawsuits, providing a mechanism for transferring business value without control during life, and then orchestrating the inheritance of assets, particularly the business assets, to the next generation with as little fuss as possible. All right, so just a little bit about myself. I am the Plain English Attorney. That's because my clients say one of my strongest suits is being able to take these complex things and boil them down into things that are real easy to understand and put into context. So I've been doing estate planning for more than 25 years. I kind of lecture on estate and Medicaid planning topics, and occasionally some of these business topics in estate planning get added into it. I've authored more than 9 books on estate planning that are available on Amazon.com. And I'm also creating and producing online courses that are available at plainenglishattorney.com. All right, so why do I do what I do? Well, you see, my grandmother experienced a huge probate problem when my grandfather passed on. Now, these are the grandparents that actually moved in and started raising me and my sister after my mother died when I was 9 years old. So they just gave up everything and moved in and just started raising me and my sister. So these were very, very giving people. And when my grandfather passed on, it was less than 2 weeks before I had to get in a car and drive off to law school. So all of this was fresh on my mind as I got into law school. And very quickly, my grandmother realized things weren't going to be that easy. And so she called me up thinking I kind of walked through the front doors and suddenly I just had all this legal knowledge. And there wasn't that much that I could do. I gave her the answer that every first-year law student tends to give when asked a question, which is, I don't know, let me look it up in the law library. So I went in and started looking at the questions she was asking, trying to find answers. Now, the reason she was asking me, even though she had an attorney, is every time she called the attorney, she'd get a bill that she didn't want and an answer that she didn't understand. So I kept trying to interpret that for her. I kept trying to find what the answers were and be able to explain it to her in plain English. And the answers I was giving her, I mean, it helped her understand, but she didn't like that this was becoming a huge process. So as I'm going through this, I mean, this is every couple of weeks or so I'm getting another question. I'm starting to think, wait a minute, it's been almost a year and a half. How is this still going on? This can't have to happen every time somebody passes on. It can't just have to be that way. So, okay, I started trying to find answers to why this was happening and how could it be prevented. Is there a way to plan ahead so things are done optimally without it just being this kind of bomb that went off and a disaster occurred? So that really set me down the path of becoming a planning attorney as opposed to one who goes to court and cleans up messes. All right, so we're going to go through this. There are easy ways and there are hard ways to do it. I try to explain everything in plain English so you can learn it as easily as possible. But if you need to get in touch with us about more information on this, we can. All right, so just as a disclaimer, this program is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. No attorney-client relationship exists between the user or viewer of this webinar video. Legal advice and perspectives among attorneys may vary, and legal advice is often different for different situations and for different people and purposes. For specific legal advice related to your particular situation, please contact an attorney in your state or jurisdiction. Copyright 2021, all rights reserved. All right, now with that out of the way, let me just give you the basic benefits of a family limited partnership. Okay, there is this additional layer of corporate protection over already existing entities. Now, I'm kind of assuming, but maybe I shouldn't, that these business interests and entities are already in either a C corporation, an S corporation, a limited liability company, or some other corporate structure that's going to provide protection from lawsuits, from people suing your businesses, getting through to your personal stuff. That's a big, big deal. Even my clients, maybe they just have an extra property, they're renting it out. They may be doing a limited liability company just to provide some shield between them and the people who are renting or going onto the property trying to sue them. Now, another benefit from family limited partnerships, it can lower the taxable estate through gifting disproportionately favorable manner of the shares. So in other words, the way the gifting kind of works, you can gift limited shares and the value is actually a lot less than the assets that they represent because there are restrictions on it. I'm going to go into that a little bit more. All right, so you can also transfer profits from a family limited partnership to the kids without it being considered gifting. Now, obviously, if it's profits being distributed out, there are going to be income tax consequences, but we'll get a little bit into that more later, but I don't want to go too depth. This isn't a tax kind of lecture. Now, the important thing is my clients, when they use family limited partnerships, they're gifting that value out. They're providing a mechanism to get some profits over to the kids, but they're not actually giving up control of the business entities, despite the fact that they're gifting shares. In fact, you have one person with a family limited partnership, they can gift away 99% of the interests, but still keep 100% of the control. We'll go into that. Okay. So let's talk about the estate planning part. First, I'm just going to go very quickly through this. Look, if you're at the point where you're talking about doing a family limited partnership, you're not using a will as your estate plan. You really need to have a revocable living trust. It's just one of those things that this is the planning that you need to do. And if you're going to be doing family limited partnerships, doing a will to do that just does not make sense. All right, so the revocable trust is going to avoid probate for assets upon death. It's going to protect the control of the assets during your life. And then if you become incapacitated, that control is going to the people or persons you want to be in control. And then it's going to distribute assets, including those company shares and interests, to the right beneficiaries upon death, including making sure control of the businesses goes to the right people. And then you should also have all of the usual ancillary documents as well. Now, again, I'm not going to go into that. I have my estate crash course. If you really want to go through that, it's estatecrashcourse.com. All right. So how is the family limited partnership set up? All right. You start with the business entities that you already have in place and, quote, adjust if needed. Now, by that I mean if you have an S corporation and that works for this particular business, but you also have an LLC or you have a couple of LLCs that have rental property in it, okay, that's fine. And well, we also have this C corporation for this very specific thing. Okay, that's fine. All of those interests can kind of stay the same. However, I put adjust if needed. If you've got a piece of rental property and it's, quote, used in business, but it's not in an LLC or some other entity, that's when, as you're doing this, you might want to go ahead and put it into an existing entity or start a new one just for that. All right, so now we also need to create the family limited partnership as an entity itself, so that you've got, okay, it's the family limited partnership. You also need to create a separate C corporation or S corporation or limited liability company. I kind of leave that up to the accountants to give the best structure. But at least in North Carolina, those entities are going to provide pretty equivalent corporate protection. Now, we'll get into how that's used in a few minutes. All right, now also realize, if you're kind of in a situation like me, this may not work for some professional entities, because as an attorney, there are only so many different corporate entities that you're allowed to have. You can't do a lot of layering. There has to be a percentage of ownership by attorneys, and that happens with other professions in North Carolina. So this might not work for that particular piece. So in these examples, let's stick to like restaurants and rental property or other types of goods and services businesses. We're going to stick with that and just realize some of these professional entities, it might not work. All right, so how is the family limited partnership organized? You have general partnership shares. All right, the general partner, that's the one who has all the control. It can be more than one person, but you have to have general partnership interests and shares. So that's who's in charge. It has 100% control. It also has 100% liability. Then there are the limited partnership shares. This is kind of the secret to valuing things the right way. Limited shares, no control, no right to vote. You don't get to force them to declare profits, and you can't transfer your shares. That's it. So that's extremely limited. Now, where this valuation kind of gets into play, if you have an entity that's worth $1 million, so each percentage is, well, you think it would be worth about $10,000, because $10,000 times that 100 gets you to the $1 million. All right, but if you want to gift that limited percentage share of 1%, you do a valuation. Well, wait, you can't vote on anything. You don't control anything. You can't transfer it where you want. You can't demand they declare profits. That might only be worth, say, $7,000 or $7,500, not $10,000. So if it's at $7,500, well, if you've got $15,000 worth of gifting, you can gift 2%, not just 1.5%, because of that, quote, discounted value. That's how the limited shares, and the fact that you really can't control anything, you can end up gifting more of it away each year. But again, you're not gifting away any control. Right now, the general partnership shares plus the limited partnership shares, they've got to equal out to 100%. But in a lot of the cases that we're doing, it's either one person they have 1% general partnership shares and 99% limited shares. In other cases, if it's a couple, okay, it's 2%. They each have 1% general shares. And then 98% is in limited shares. It just has to total up to 100%. And again, realize all control and complete liability is in the general partnership shares. Zero control and no liability rests in the limited partnership shares. Now, this is usually where people go, well, wait a minute, isn't corporate protection supposed to insulate me from liability? Well, yeah. All right, so complete liability, no, we don't want that. All right. The liability loophole is that your general partnership shares, even though they've got personal liability for company lawsuits, you don't keep them in your name or even in the name of your trust. You're moving it into that separate C Corp or S Corp or LLC. That's going to own the general partnership shares, and that's what's going to put up that wall of protection between your personal assets and business liability. So yeah, it's an extra step, it's an extra corporate entity, but that's what's going to provide your protection from liability. Now, I call this the management company because it's managing all of the other businesses that are inside of it. And we'll get to how that may be used to have profits go a certain way or not. All right, so how is this all really coming together? Well, all of the existing business entity interests are moved into the family limited partnership. It's not like you're getting rid of those other entities and you're directly putting this business into the family limited partnership. No, let's just say you have, and I'm just pulling this out of nowhere, you have a Subway franchise and it's owned by a limited liability company, or even 50% owned by a limited liability company. All right, you own that limited liability company. You don't get rid of it. You move your limited liability company interests into your family limited partnership. So it's kind of not moving the actual business. You're moving the corporate interests that you own into the family limited partnership. So then the general partnership shares, well, you're moving that into the management company because you want that protection. All right, who owns the management company? Let's just say it's an LLC. Who are the members who own all of the interests in the LLC? Your trust. So your trust owns the management company. The management company owns the general partnership shares of the family limited partnership. All right, then what about the limited partnership shares? You also move those directly into the Revocable Living Trust. So now your trust has 100% of the interest in the family limited partnership. It's just that with the general partnership interests, it's kind of being held through the management company. So that's the setup. So all of these interests are in your revocable trust. And if you've been through the estate crash course or you've read about Revocable Living Trust, you're the trustor, you're the trustee, you're the beneficiary of your trust. You still control everything, including now all of the family limited partnership interests in one fashion or another through one entity or another. You still stay in complete control. All right. What about the Revocable Living Trust provisions? All right. During your life, the business owners maintain control since they are the trustees, and the trustees control the management company. That's where all of the action is. That's where all the control is. Now, your trust becomes the plan to distribute all of the assets after death, including the various business shares to the right individuals. And the trustors, they can transfer some or all of those business interests to the beneficiaries during life, but most of the time, even if they're giving away that 98 or 99%, they're keeping the percentages for the general partnership shares to maintain control through that management company. Now, the management company controls the profits. So I'm just going to, okay, before we get into an example, how does the management company control the profits and what happens? Well, we'll get to an example in a bit, but if you gift away some of those limited partnership shares, let's just say you've given away 50%. If the family limited partnership has $100,000 of profit, well, if you've kept 50%, you can take 50,000 and the other 50,000 can get distributed out to the other limited partnership owners. Okay, that's one way of doing it. What if you don't want to distribute it? How do you get around that? Maybe, as the person who's really running everything, you want all of that. You don't want to share that with the kids at that particular instance. Okay, that's fine. Your management company is going to charge fees of $100,000, making the family limited partnership profits zero because it has that expense of the management company's fees, and now you get the $100,000 of money through the management company fees and pay your appropriate taxes and whatnot, but it's all under your control. So you can do this in whole or in part to manage what money is going out to those limited shareholders. If you're thinking about it as like dividends, well, if there's this expense to the management company that zeroes out those profits, well, there are no dividends. So I'm going to use an example, and we're just going to go with easy names. It's John and Jane Doe. Now, their children are A, B, and C, Arnold, Betty, and Cindy, with Arnold and Betty being involved in the business. Okay, so Cindy isn't involved in the business, but that's okay. Let's say there are 8 different businesses. Some of them, John Doe has 50% ownership, some it's a third, others he's got 100% ownership through these various entities. But anything that John Doe has in those 8 different businesses, that's going into the family limited partnership. And all limited shares end up going into the John and Jane Doe Trust, and all the general partnership shares go into Doe Management LLC. Who owns Doe Management LLC? The trust, and through the trust, John and Jane Doe are owning that. So that's the setup. We've got those different entities. Realize that you don't have to have 100% control of a business in order to have your percentage of shares or your number of shares going into your family limited partnership. One caveat to that, you have to check with the corporate paperwork to make sure you're allowed to transfer shares that way. Sometimes I have clients that do have 50-50 rental property with, say, another couple. They bought it together, and each couple has 50% of those interests. But somewhere in their limited liability company operating agreement, it says they're not allowed to transfer shares, period. All right, we may have to amend that corporate paperwork that it's allowed that they can transfer it into an entity such as a family limited partnership or a trust or some combination of that. Okay? All right. Now, the children, Arnold, Betty, and Cindy, with Arnold and Betty, they're each going to end up, maybe over a couple of years, they're going to get 10% of the shares in the form of limited shares. So John and Jane Doe are going to gift things out so that Arnold, Betty, Cindy are each getting 10%. So they're going to keep 68% of those in the form of those limited shares, and the 2% of the general shares are going to stay in the management company and stay in the trust, but they want to give out 10% to each of those 3 kids. Great. Now, remember, Arnold and Betty are working in the business and Cindy isn't. So how do we handle that? Well, Arnold and Betty receive salaries if they need bonuses because they worked extra hard. It's not a gift. It's not getting paid from the family limited partnership. They're getting paid out of the various business entities for the work that they're doing, so they can get those salaries. It doesn't have to be through the family limited partnership. Now, you can also kind of do this at the management company level as well. The point is, they're not getting their paycheck, their bonuses necessarily from the family limited partnership, because that's part of the profits that John and Jane Doe want to control. So the net profits for each of those entities, and potentially losses or whatever, it flows through into the family limited partnership. So the family limited partnership profits are, 1, distributed to the general partnership and limited partnership shares. So again, it would be based on the percentage of ownership, period, regardless of whether it's general or limited partner. Or those profits can be retained within the family limited partnership. Now, there's going to be some tax consequences to that, but okay. The management company can charge management fees, like I mentioned before, and take some or all of those profits and send it through to John and Jane Doe via the management company. Or there can be some kind of combination of these. Now, it's important to note that this is something where you want to make sure you've got a bright accountant who's able to manage and oversee all of this stuff, because the more business entities you have, the more complicated it gets. But one thing I've kind of found over the years, if you've got all these different business entities and different things have different parameters and whatnot, the people who can really hold a lot of that in their head and make sense of it are accountants, and the other one is engineers. So getting a good accountant is something that's also key. All right, so now John Doe passes on, and this is before Jane Doe passes on. All right, all of the shares are maintained as they are during Jane Doe's lifetime. Now, she could potentially gift more of those limited shares, but all right. John Doe was the one doing all the day-to-day operations, but Arnold, the son, all right, he's going to take over those day-to-day operations. His sister Betty is going to be the CFO. But Jane Doe is still in charge. Since she's in charge of the trust, she's the trustee, she's the beneficiary, she's controlling the management company, which controls all of those entities inside the family limited partnership. Now, Arnold and Betty's salaries or their bonuses, they can be increased based on their expanded responsibilities and duties. But again, profits are only declared through the controlling interests, which are in the management company. So Jane Doe is still in charge of all of that. Even if she's actually giving day-to-day authority to Arnold and Betty, it's still Jane who's in charge. All right. Now what happens when Jane Doe passes on? All right. The distribution plan reflected in the trust provides for all those shares to be divided among the children and grandchildren. And the way, I'm just going to put this out as a stranger, well, not stranger, not as common example where they want the grandchildren in, just to show that it really can be flexible based on your wishes. 3 shares for each living child and 1 share for each grandchild. Now, I'm not talking about general partner shares or limited shares. I'm talking about percentage interests. So let me just define this example. We've got the 3 kids, but we have 7 grandkids. All right, well, 3 plus 3 plus 3, that's 9 plus 7, that's 16 shares. So that's 1/16 for each share. The kids are getting 3 times that, 3/16 each, and then each of the grandkids gets 1/16. Now, you can have, if a child passes on, their descendants are going to inherit those 3 shares equally, those 3/16 equally. But you do want to put in the trust that there are specific provisions about the management company shares. If it's the plan is that Arnold's taking over, then part of Arnold's 3/16 must contain the management company. So now Arnold just takes over and everybody else has some stake in the company, but he's maintaining control. Now, just as another standard thing that goes into revocable trust, there's got to be an age limit. Most of my clients are picking age of 40 when it comes to the grandkids, and there's more about that in my estate crash course if you really want to go through it. But if there are declared profits, well, those profits can be used for their benefit, such as for education. So now Arnold can help plan for college education via some profits from the family limited partnership being used to manage things for his kids as well as nieces and nephews. So this can all continue as a family business, family organization. All right, so that's really it when it's coming to family limited partnerships. Now, the anticipation is that I'm actually going to end up turning this into a course, so this will be the introduction to it. So I hope you found that information useful. What we always tell our clients is please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And whatever you do, make it a great day. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do.